Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 855. I'm Tom Cagley, your host. Today, we feature our conversation with Khurram Mir. We talked about testing, quality assurance control, and frameworks. We discussed whether we would still discuss the link between continual scheduling pressure and reduced quality in 19 years. What is your opinion? Let's face it, effective testing is essential for effective delivery of value. Mr. Mir's bio. Steering Kualitatem as co-founder and chief marketing officer, Khurram focuses on nurturing client relationships through transparency and a commitment to quality. The team's dedication to customer satisfaction and growth has been unwavering for over 15 years. With a distinct proficiency in new business development and software applications, they have successfully positioned Kualitatem as a leader in quality assurance. Founding Kualitee highlighted Khurram's journey in product management, channeling his competencies into creating a tool that simplifies and enhances the testing process for teams. The platform reflects their mission to make quality management both efficient and enjoyable. Are you ready to talk quality assurance and quality control? It's time for the conversation. Khurram Mir, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Thank you for having me, Tom. Pleasure to be here.
Ever since we scheduled this, I have been looking forward to it. This has words in the introduction and the ideas. Things like testing and TMMI, things that have been part and parcel of my career. So therefore, I tend to have a tad bit of a soft spot for. Let's start actually, a little on the basic side, and then maybe go a tad bit controversial, and then we'll circle back to the good stuff. How do you define quality assurance?
Okay, so for me personally, I define it in a way where you're proactively trying to look for optimizing something to be done rather than in a reactive manner where you find issues and then you try to fix them. So for me, it is more about how proactive, how ready you are in terms of delivering the software specifically. So it needs to be proactive, it needs to be thought through, and then it needs to be implemented cohesively as well.
And that's a marvelous definition. Does that mean that the people playing that role really have to be embedded in the entirety of the software development lifecycle?
So, look, I think there is some transition that is happening, and I think it's for good of QA process as well, that now teams need to be embedded not just on the software side, but also on the business side. Because the QA and the quality assurance and the testing as a process is incomplete if you don't understand how the business is working. And just sitting in one silo of more like engineering will give you some part of the understanding of, for example, how you want to define, let's say, quality parameters of that software. But some of that information needs to come from the business side. So yes, they need to be embedded with the tech team, but I think importantly enough, they also need to be embedded in the business teams too.
I buy that. It's interesting that was the basic model of software development maintenance for years and years back last century. And then we pulled it into sort of a monolithic thing where we put up all these silos, and now we're migrating back. The word or the phrase quality assurance has always sort of rankled me just a little bit, because one of the primary tools that gets used is testing. And regardless of how proactive we make the idea of testing, testing is cleaning up somebody else's mess. And therefore, are we assuring quality,
Sure.
or are we trying to control quality?
So you're right about this one. I mean, when I talk to customers specifically, they all think of testing as a last part. Like testing comes in when you have done the development. You spend far more time on designing and development. But specifically, if you use testing in that context, then it is, of course, quality control. I mean, I was looking at this series Loki, and they introduced this concept of, time varies authority. I mean, I think the testers are like the process varies authority. Like if things are going off tangent in terms of some business process implementation, they can come in and fix it or highlight it. That's where some sort of variation is happening. So I think that is where quality control specifically comes in. What I was talking was more like what is the best way of looking at it,
Mm-hmm.
and what is probably the most purest way of looking at it. Like people use agile terms, like they say we are doing agile development. But if you look at the process deeply, I mean, sometimes not even agile. But in the purest form, I would say the QA part is much more important and it needs to be far more proactive. In practical terms, it becomes QC, it comes an afterthought. It comes more like a firefighting, actually.
This is 2025 when we're recording this, and the podcast has been around for 19 years. So it's possible that people might be listening to this in 2044. Will we still be talking about the distinction between quality control and quality assurance, and why actually things like testing needs to be proactive in 19 more years? Because we've been talking about it for
Yes, I won't be
50 already.
surprised. Yeah. I won't be surprised, to be honest. I mean, like people still ask me the same question. Oh, like with, let's say, automating the scripts or automating the testing process, will the manual testing or the functional testing go away? We still have those conversations. I joined testing as a career back in 2001, and like 24 years of me being in the testing domain and the testing world, some questions have never really changed, to be honest. Like no matter, we have AI now to support development and testing and everything. So I won't be surprised if 19 years down the road we are asking questions. Yep,
That's
I agree with you 100%.
to me, that's a tad bit sad, but would be wonderful if we would get over that hump. You mentioned AI, and I hadn't really thought about that as of this morning. In terms of quality assurance, has leveraging AI in business and other forms of applications, has that fundamentally changed how, quality assurance is done?
I think it hasn't really fundamentally changed. I mean, like if AI is still an enabler, in my opinion. I mean, if I'm a tester and, for example, I don't understand a specific domain, maybe I can use AI to get some sort of understanding. But even if I use AI to generate those test cases, like who is going to validate that? Okay, this test case needs to be applied to our product or to our testing activity. That is still a human intervention, right? So I think AI is going to be an enabler, but is it going to fundamentally change everything? I think we still need to see. But with this whole idea about agents coming in, the AI agents, I mean, we may see far more use cases of AI being in the testing activity than where we see right now.
So we're going to have AI testing AI?
To some extent, yeah, that is true. Yeah.
It doesn't well, and then
Testing AI, testing
then
AI. Yeah.
yeah,
I
but
agree.
then we get into an interesting discussion as to whether or not quality assurance has to be part of the selection of the data that trains AI models and extends the idea of where quality assurance has to be involved.
I agree. And I think the QA data needs to be embedded also to help those future agents like test it properly at the same time. So if you can have database, you can have those training based on, for example, let's say take example of defect on the severity, on the type of issues that are called blockers and so on and so forth. And we can enable testers to test and log the data faster. That is going to improve the productivity of the whole team. And again, we need to remember that when people typically engage a testing team or a QA team, it's already like very less time given to them. So anything that can help them expedite, deliver more value to the business teams or to the technology project, it's great for everybody, actually.
Yeah, I've always worried that when the model is an independent or a separate testing or quality team at the end, that it becomes the sort of like a dog, right? It's the tip of the tail that gets whipped, and that's where all of the stress becomes. But that may be one of those things that we're talking about in 19 years. Why can't we? Well, at that, I'll be a little bit, perhaps I won't be in the business at that point. Testing, quality assurance, whatever the word we want to use for it, is this overhead or is this something that can actually drive value, drive innovation in an organization?
Oh, very good question. I mean, just 2 days ago, I was talking to somebody and I was telling them exactly the same thing. They don't look at QA or testing as an overhead or as a cost center. Look at it from a value center. So, for example, in one case, what we figured out was for one of the customers that we saved them, let's say, X number of bugs, but those bugs, if they were found in production, would increase their cost by like 23% or something as a number. So the cost is just very high if a customer reports to you. So, I mean, it could be a bad reputation and these qualitative issues that you get into that separately, but just purely on number basis, like support tickets, people who are required to manage those tickets, and then developers who have to fix that bug, so on and so forth. That cost is slightly more than what people anticipate it to be. And I think that's where quality needs to be taken as a value center because it can help you save you those costs basically.
Do we actually have data that supports things like the 110, 100 kind of ratio? I can reach over and grab all my Capers Jones books. Once upon a lifetime ago, I worked with Capers. So I can grab all those books. Is there data that tells us that finding defects later? I think we all believe that, but is there real data that proves to us that that's actually true?
Yeah. So, I mean, the example that I was giving was a very specific customer with which we had the understanding that, okay, if we do X amount of exercise for you guys, we look at the data from, for example, your call center, your support team, and then the time that developers are taking. So our exercise was done actually on a very specific case. So for that customer, so that's why I use the word for that customer, we were able to show it to them that there's a 23% cost that is saving if the bug is not found on their website, right? So that was a very specific data. Now this can have different variation in terms of the answer for different industries. We were talking about the bank. Now, if you're a small startup, maybe for you guys, maybe that it's a different type of problem that you would want to address through this data. It could be qualitative aspect. So, for example, bad press. That could be one angle for a startup, maybe. But I think the data is available, and we can create data as well based on the testing activity, the defects that have not been found, and any similar examples of the defects that have been found and that have been reported at the production server.
I'm glad to see that you're collecting and having a data-driven conversation versus using, basically truisms that I think we all think are true, but we don't know.
And sometimes, it's important to make sometimes people want to know, right? I mean, maybe the CIO, the CTO, or the VP engineering, they want to know.
So.
But it's, in my opinion, yeah, no, seriously. I mean, sometimes I've found that the problem is more on the quality side. That as QA experts, we need to think of more like, okay, how can I quantify my effort? Right? I may say that I will spend 10 hours testing, but what is the value of that 10 hours of testing activity for my business, for my head of development, right? For my CEO even. And that onus is on us as a quality experts.
I that if you're not listening at this point, you need to go back about 15 seconds and re-listen to that answer. If you went away or sneezed or had a cup of coffee, that is that is just so radically important. What's the role of test management tools in all of this?
Transparency. I think this is the word that I use for test management tools. I mean, they help everybody who's a stakeholder, like a product manager, the project manager, the CTO, the testing team, the test manager, have the visibility as to what is, first of all, the activity that the testing team is performing, what are the areas they're focusing more on, but also importantly, what is the health of the product? So, for example, if through a test tool, me being a CTO, I can see, like in this particular functionality, we have bugs constantly coming up, in every cycle. Maybe I want to look at, have I done the right architecture? Is the right programming we have been done at the coding level? So I think the test management tools are basically enablers for us to make right decisions as product managers, as project managers, as CTOs, as test managers as well. Because eventually the resources are scarce, right? So we all want to make sure that the best way our resources can be used, we should know that path. And I think the testing tool will help you figure that path out.
I've seen organizations that have adopted testing tools. Sometimes it becomes more about the tool than it does about
Mhm.
actually delivering value. How would you avoid making it about the tool, not actually getting stuff done in high value?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think tool again is an enabler. I mean, you need to have the process in place first. I tell people that, don't worry about tools. You will always get tools. I mean, there are always tools available in the market. But the most important thing is, how do you want to use that? What are your driving factors of having that tool in place? And I think most of that conversation needs to come from the process side. That, okay, we have implemented an A process. We see B results from this process. And now we want to make sure that everybody sees those benefits and results. So that's where you bring in a tool. And I think as testing, more often than not, I've seen that these processes are not followed. They would have the tools and they would have figured out some way to use the tool as well, even if it is not meant for testing or test project management, test process management. So for me, the key part is not really the tool itself. Is what process have you adopted? How are you measuring that process? I mean, what is the variance of that process through different projects? And how can you standardize some of those processes? And then when you have done all of that work, I mean, you can start putting those in the form of a software and then show value to your stakeholders through that.
Is that where frameworks like the TMMI become important?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, you can only improve what you can measure, right? Now, if you don't measure properly, and I mean, like people, like organizations like CMMI, even the CMMI. I mean, like at one point in time, I remember working for companies who were CMMI level 5 certified, and I figured how better their development processes were. Yes, there is an overhead cost of running these processes, but again, it's the value proposition that comes in. And similarly, when we were starting our business on the testing front, we wanted to like that was one of my goals from day one, that we want to be a TMMI level 5 company. Because I think if I want to tell somebody how can they improve the process, I also need to know how to measure that improvement for them and also advise them, okay, I mean, like nobody is 100% wrong. I mean, they must be doing something right in the development life cycle. Now, if we want to make sure that we want to give them the most impact, we need to first measure where there is a bigger weakness. So we can focus on that area, fix it for them, and then move on to the next stages. So TMMI or any such certification, depending on which industry we work with, helps you measure and figure out what is the optimal way of delivering the same service.
What do you see as the take up on things like the TMMI?
I mean, I think there is a far more adoption of TMMI now than it was like a few years ago. And I think one of the reasons is that everybody is beginning to realize, maybe because now we have so many tools available that they do give us a holistic picture of our let's say inefficiencies as a process, that people are more and more looking at these kind of certifications and frameworks specifically to figure out, okay, how can they improve their software development life. So I think there is a huge, I mean, CMMI consistently has been picking up in my opinion. I see far more companies now TMMI level 5 certified than what I saw like 3 years ago even.
Well, that's good. It's been a long road on the TMMI side.
It's
Uh,
been a long road, yes.
yeah, I've been involved. I was involved for a long time. From the point of view of things like the TMMI, if you were looking for a partner, looking for a tools company, would you be looking for a TMMI evaluated organization as a partner or a tool company?
Yes, because if I want to improve the process, that is one indicator for me that, okay, this company has adopted this process and this framework, so they must be following some sort of processes in-house as well. That would be my indicator. I'm not necessarily saying that that may be the final benchmark, but of course, if you are as a CTO or as a head of software engineering looking for a partner company, and your biggest challenge is the lack of processes, your biggest challenge is not being aware of what kind of issues are coming up on the production side, and you want to fix them at the core architecture or the software engineering level. So, if you want to have these kind of issues and you want to talk to the right people, then one parameter or one indicator is that you talk to somebody or a company that has TMI certification in place already.
I think that's good advice also. Before we start to wrap, what's the biggest pushback that you see your organization, of adopting good quality assurance practices?
So the biggest challenge typically in enterprises I've seen is that they are very adverse to changing anything. So the problem is not that they're just trying to improve like the whole testing as an activity. I mean, they don't want to change anything. They just want everything to be done in similar fashion. And typically when I'm sitting with a CI or CTO, my one statement is that listen, quality is not just a testing team's responsibility. It is the responsibility of everybody in the organization. It starts from the CTO, it goes down to the developer or even the support guy. And it's a mentality. It's not again a process of filling out some documentation. It's that you need to think towards it. And you can start with one department, maybe testing as a department, but everybody needs to add to it and build on it basically. So that is the biggest. I think is the mindset that people have that like we will bring in testing and then our work will be looked at from another angle and they become resistant to that part of thought process is where things become more difficult. I mean, if somebody is not willing to change, then it's a very hard thing to do that. So the first premise is that or the CTOs, they need to have that understanding that yes, we are going to engage a third party or we are going to bring in our own testing teams. We need to look at improving our current process. That is the first thing that needs to happen for them to improve. And that is the biggest challenge. That is the biggest challenge, frankly, I face every single time.
I buy that. It's funny. It really is. The fear of change. I don't think people are that afraid of change. They're afraid of change that they don't think will be good for them. Let's take that. There are a lot of good changes that we embrace very nicely, but it boils down to a people problem, right? The whole psychology of change is so critical to making any of these things work. Laying in a process, laying in a tool, just, dumping it on top of things. People will call work different things, but they'll do it the same way. And, it'll be costly. Khurram, this has been marvelous.
Yeah. No, I agree.
This has been absolutely marvelous. If you woke up tomorrow morning and someone handed you a cup of the caffeinated beverage of your choice and a magic wand and said that you had the power to change any two things affecting quality assurance across the organization, what would those two things be and why?
I think the first thing would be that I would like people to see quality as not as a cost center, but as a value center. I think that is the most important thing for them to regard quality assurance as a general thing is, and no matter what industry is even for that matter. So that is one thing I would like to see being changed at the top level. Again, it starts from the top, like the CIO, the CTO, and the product engineering head. They need to do that. And the second one is more on the testing side. I mean, like I think people, test engineers or the quality assurance engineers specifically, they get too much confused about like the value of functional testing versus like my job will be obsolete because some automated tool is going to come in. So this is what I tell people who are coming from the testing industry and if they speak to me and wherever they speak to me, that the most important thing, the skill you have is the analytical skill. If you have strong analysis, you will not go away. You will not be replaced by a tool because at the end of the day, that analysis, that understanding of a business problem and how the software needs to behave in that to solve that business problem is where your value is. And the more you sharpen your analytical skills, and for that, I suggest mostly to read stuff, outside the software testing world. Like look at what other industries are doing. Like have some hobbies, do some stuff that you don't do normally. Like try to give yourself something to do in a year which you have not done in the life before. That will help you build and sharpen your analytical skills a lot more. And I think that these are the two things. So the one is more on the other side of the table, at the management side, but also on the QA side. I think this is what needs to be changed.
That's it. Especially that second one, I think is absolutely brilliant. As I said, this has been marvelous. How would people continue the conversation? How would they find out about you, your organizations?
So they can check us out at www.kualitatem.com, and I will send you my LinkedIn profile. You can probably add that in the tag as well. And they can check us also check our test management product at quality.com as well.
This has been marvelous. At this point, I open up the platform for my interviews. You've shared a lot of great information. There are, lots of really good golden nuggets throughout this podcast. I open up the platform for you to promote anything that you'd like. So the platform is yours.
I would just say as one thing that, no matter where we are in terms of our software testing journey as a professional, I think we should look for improvement in our work, in our process at our level as well. Again, a lot of the time testing team think that, this is not our problem. It's happening at the development side, at the design level. I'd say, look at what you can fix, look at what you control, because what you control is going to make an impact as well. So that's the parting thought I would say, to anybody who's listening to this podcast.
And that's absolutely fair. Khurram Mir, thank you again for spending time this morning with the Software Process and Measurement Cast listeners.
Thank you so much, Tom, for having me. Thank you.
Remember, Mastering Work Intake, the book, the class, sponsors the Software Process and Measurement Cast. Links in the show notes to buy a copy so that you can take control of your work intake process. Interested in continuing the conversation about work intake with your peers in a safe space? Join the Mastering Work Intake community on LinkedIn. Link again in the show notes. In Reread Saturday News, this week in our reread of Development is Freedom, we tackle Chapter 7, Famines and Other Crises, which examines the impact of freedoms and leadership through the lens of famines and other crises. This chapter also builds on Chapter 6's discussion of democracy. Remember, that was 2 weeks ago. Human agency can cause and sustain famines and other crises at all levels of society. Links to this week's and all previous week's installments of our Reread Saturday of Development is Freedom in the show notes. Remember, buy a copy, read along. In the Software Process and Measurement Cast, number 856 will feature an essay on delivering in an unstable environment and why it's like playing billiards on a boat. The outcome is unpredictable. We'll also have a visit from John M. Quigley. Mr. Quigley brings his alpha and omega of product development column to the cast. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?